Yeah, will we squeeze in this round?
Yeah, there'll be some seats here.
Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone gathered here tonight, as well as those joining us as part of the live stream. Your Royal Majesty, welcome. It's a great privilege to host you here tonight, and please again accept our congratulations on behalf of the British Museum on your Silver Jubilee. Welcome to all of you, and in particular I'd like to recognise here this evening His Excellency, former President John A. Kufuor, His Excellency, the Ghana High Commissioner to the UK, Papa Owusu Ankama and his wife Augustina, and the Right Honourable the Lord Paul Boateng and Lady Janet Boateng, as well as esteemed ambassadors and traditional leaders present here today. The relationship between the Golden Stool of Asante and the British Museum is one which is now 200 years old. And we were delighted that the visit of Your Royal Majesty to the British Museum last year was the catalyst for signing a new memorandum of understanding between the Golden Stool and the British Museum. The recent collaboration on the exhibition in Kumasi and this lecture are the first results of this new phase in our relationship, and we look forward to continuing this partnership with new projects. Today, the British Museum is firmly committed to building productive and beneficial relationships around these collections. We thank Your Royal Majesty for your wisdom and leadership in fostering this strong partnership. I would now like to welcome to the stage the highly distinguished philosopher and writer, Professor Kwame Anthony Appiah, President of the American Academy of Letters, who will now provide an introduction to His Royal Majesty's lecture. Thank you.
Successful collaboration that could inject fresh momentum into the economy of Ghana. In the meantime, I will urge the continued pursuit of collaboration with the museums and advanced cultural institutions, renewed attention to training in the creative arts, and a vigorous effort to expand market opportunities for works of African artists. The quest for restitution should be no reason for closing the market to our artists. On the contrary, it should point to the searchlight on the value of African art to museums and collectors for legitimate acquisition. African artists need to be appreciated. They have to be seen to be appreciated, and like all other artists, they can only be seen through museums and galleries. Opening the market to them and expanding the range of opportunities to them should be part of the global conversation. The African genius was hardly a match for the factory, whose products began to flood African markets even at the early stages of colonial venture. He was worried of the loss of the integrative role of art in normal community development, especially of the Kudo of the Asante, whose decorative motifs were, as much the case in Africa, symbols of traditional lessons, proverbs, moral counsels, and episodes in history. Heritage, including Soyinka's writing on the Kudo, almost 40 years ago, could get out of fashion and suffer nostalgia, but regenerates itself with patrons going back to the original or authentic make, as they have done at Sokoban for centuries, where these brass treasures are manufactured for the public and to replenish the palace collection that are inherited. These days, unlike in the past, clients go with their own designs, whether to the Edinkra symbols or from other societies in West Africa and beyond. Thus, heritage, in whatever form, could be reinterpreted and reinvented. Long may the regeneration of cultures adapt. Culinary asks, this is one of the favorite edible vegetables, almost sacred. Or to quote an authority closer to some of you, Francis Bacon proclaims that the genuines, wit, and spirit of a nation are discovered by their proverbs. At the risk of appearing to over-egg the pudding, one will find in the Anansi stories a mini Shakespearean experience in wit and wisdom and complexity in storytelling. And yet, we have only the example of the mother of our chairman today, Peggy Cripps Appiah, who has endeavored to add the inimitable Anansi to the literature of our times. Equally, one sees little of the proverb distilled from the pot of wisdom of our forefathers. We can only express our deepest appreciation for the sincerity of the endeavor in capturing the essence of our heritage to a skeptical world. But our debt to MacLeod is even greater for his readiness to join my grandson Ivo Ajuandria to negotiate with the museums on behalf of the Menchia Museum for the return of the artifacts. But even as we acknowledge the seminal works of these historians and their Ghanaian colleagues, such as Albert Edubuahin, J. Kwabanketia, Alex Ataya Shamatin, William Tordorf, and Kwame Ahin, one has to concede to the relative paucity of literature in our heritage. Is consecrated to memorize his reign. He becomes a continuous spiritual presence in the affairs of the state, and successors are required to swear an oath to continue with his good deeds. Without the benefit of the alphabet, during the epoch of the birth of the Asante Union, the soul of the nation, our moral and spiritual values, the ethos of our being, all found expression not in literature, but in our artistic creations, in folklore, in music, and in our irresistible kente cloth. Our chiefs were adorned in them as expression of their leadership, but the artisans were the conveyors of the philosophical underpinnings of our blossoming state. In their monarch, and in the chiefs constituting the traditional state. In Asante etymology, Tete, the past, is a loaded invocation from ancient history and a nod to our beings, our very founding. Our folklore tapestry has hundreds of proverbs associated with it. Two of them, Tete Wubika, the past has something to say, and Tete Wubiche, the past has something to teach us across historical times in our cardinal sociology of memory. This respect for our past provides the unbroken thread that keeps the... So through the years of colonial rule, through the storms of pre-independence struggle to the revolutionary challenges of recent history, the institution, the Asante state, as structured by our forefathers, has remained as resilient as ever. Thankfully, it is not only the people of Asante who are the devotees of chieftaincy. They probably may be the greater believers, but there is no part of Ghana where chiefs, as traditional leaders, do not have a sway. As a result, the people of Ghana have fashioned a constitution which has wisely voted the institution of chieftaincy onto the institutions of the modern democratic state. So we are able to serve the national interests as a steadying hand in troubled circumstances, a glue for national cohesion, and a dependable channel for a union of states of real consequence during the same epoch when the Federalists and Confederates were struggling to create the Federal Union, which is the United States of America. The convergence of these objectives within the same epoch in time, I would suggest, deserves historical acknowledgement. The power of the alphabet, which is writing and reading, had not yet penetrated the forest zone, and none of the chiefs gathered together had received any form of external education which would have influenced their thinking. It therefore speaks to their innate wisdom and creativity in embarking upon this exercise in nation building, and yet the Union State they created, with the monarch at the apex of and the golden stool at the unifying emblem, has endured through all the changing times to this day. And continued with this quest, and even held a major exhibition in collaboration with the British Museum in 1982. Asante Kingdom of Gold, which was jointly opened by him and the Duke of Gloucester. He traveled to the American Museum of Natural History in New York the same year. That formal cooperation with this museum, as inherited correspondences show, has been on for 50 years, and the ultimate issue of the return of objects had danced around some other forms of cultural cooperation until recently. I took up the matter shortly after ascending to the Golden Stool and was encouraged by the fact that the restitution of cultural objects had become an issue of global concern with legitimate claims from several countries. The UNESCO had made it a priority. It is no longer disputed that many cultural objects were either looted or extracted from Africa and other colonial zones illegally. But even while acknowledging this, nations point to a litany of legal and historical barriers to ready restitution. I recognize the depth of feeling, the legitimate emotion generated by this issue. In a world already wobbling in a myriad of political miscalculations, we cannot afford to allow this to fester beyond control. We chose the path of silent diplomacy, believing that with trust and sincerity of purpose, we could navigate the maze and find a way that brings us to the point of mutual satisfaction. When we seriously engaged with the two museums, I set my team a target to make sure my people would see their stolen ornaments back in Kumasi for the silver jubilee of our reign.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, I think I know why I was asked to speak today. It's because my sisters and I are the fruits of a long-term, successful Anglo-Asante collaboration. I've been married between my English mother and my Asante father, but the connection I've discovered runs much further back. As you know, Nana Krumah I was exiled to the Seychelles after Asante became a crown colony. Well, the British cabinet that approved the return of Nana Krumah I to Asante in 1924 included my great-grandfather, Lord Palmer. And the connections don't end there, because when my Asante grandfather's brother-in-law, Nana Krumah II, became Asantehene in 1931, his appointment required the consent of the Secretary of State for the Colonies, who happened to be my great-great-uncle, Lord Mansfield. In this room today, another family is represented whose ancestor was an important figure in the history of constructive relations between England and Asante. Because Thomas Edward Bowditch, whose descendants are with us here, visited the Asantehene Nanase Bonsu in 1817 and 18, bringing back a treaty of perpetual peace and harmony for Anglo-Asante relations on the Gold Coast. And his book, Mission from Cape Coast Castle to Ashanti, is one of the earliest extended accounts by a European of life at the Asante port. People sometimes focus on the 5 Anglo-Asante wars of the 19th century, but between the end of the first, which settled the southern boundary of Asante at the Pra River in 1831, and the beginning of the second in 1863, there were 3 decades of peace. Still, one thing we acknowledge today is the first and only unhappy anniversary of the 3 that we are recognizing, which today It's because my sisters and I are the fruits of a long-term, successful Anglo-Asante collaboration. Namely the marriage between my English mother and my Asante father. But the connection I've discovered runs much further back. As you know, Nana Purpose I was exiled to the Seychelles after Asante became a crown colony. Well, the British cabinet that approved the return of Nana Purpose I to Asante in 1924 included my great-grandfather, Lord Palmer. And the connections don't end there, because when my Asante grandfather's brother-in-law, Nana Purpose II, became Asantehene in 1931, his appointment required the consent of the Secretary of State for the Colonies, who happened to be my great-great-uncle, Lord Basfield. In this room today, another family is represented whose ancestor was an important figure in the history of constructive relations between England and Asante. Because Thomas Edward Bowditch, whose descendants are with us here, visited the Asantehene Nanase Bonsu in 1817 and 18, bringing back a treaty of perpetual peace and harmony for Anglo-Asante relations on the Gold Coast. And his book, Mission from Cape Coast Castle to Ashanti, is one of the earliest extended accounts by a European of life at the Asante court. People sometimes focus on the 5 Anglo-Asante wars of the 19th century, but between the end of the first, which settled the southern boundary of Asante at the Pra River in 1831, and the beginning of the second in 1863, there were 3 decades of peace. Still, one thing we acknowledge today is the first and only unhappy anniversary of the 3 that we are recognizing, which
Will we squeeze in this round?
Yeah, they'll be squeezed in.